Welcome to r/malicious compliance, where we share stories of people conforming to the letter but not the spirit of a request. And today we have 3 great stories, so subscribe, hit the like button, and let's begin. The first story: DMV customer demands employee be fired. Instead, employee is rewarded for having to put up with DMV customers' hattery. The second story: leasing agent roommate moved into my room without my permission and lied about it actually being his room all along. The third story: boss got mad I helped other departments when I was out of work, told me to stay at my desk no matter what. Today's first story is DMV customer wants employee fired. In my early career as a public servant, I managed a section at the Department of Motor Vehicles, DMV. I had 1 public-facing counter and 10 other employees in the back. I always told the people at the lone window to call me if they had a difficult customer, because I didn't want them to feel intimidated being all by their lonesome in a tiny space, in a lightly trafficked area. Well, my grumpiest, most difficult employee was always rubbing people the wrong way, and we had a huge meeting where I had to tell her that her job was on the line. In the future, I needed her to be rainbows and kittens, and to call me before anything went sideways. So 2 hours later, she calls me with this saccharine tone in her voice, and said she needed me to help a customer. So I make my long way to her tucked away corner, and this customer is towering over her and screaming with spittle flying out of the corners of his mouth. My employee is literally pressed up against the filing cabinets to get as far away from him as she can. Irate customer wants us to find out what the VIN was on a vehicle he owned in 1955. Then he wants to know who owns that car. So for part 1, finding the VIN, we can do a record search on microfilm for $10 an hour, plus $10 for the record. He has to provide a credit card in advance and authorization to charge up to X hours for searching. He doesn't care how long it takes, he just wants it now, and he's going to wait for it. We had about 40,000 rolls of poorly indexed microfilm, so he could be looking at an entirely unreasonable charge. Oh, and he wants to wait for it. As for who currently owns the car, we would have to find every instance of that car's registration to find the last known registration. But we never microfilmed registration until 1996, so it's unlikely that we could locate it. On top of that, we won't give out that person's information without certain criteria being met, none of which this guy satisfies. So I walk up to this angry dude, and he turns on me and starts to yell at me. I hold my hand up like I'm a traffic cop and say, "Sir, I'm absolutely going to help you, but I could help you faster if we used calm, quiet voices." To my utter surprise, he stopped yelling, but he began insisting that my employee be fired right now. I explained that we have a disciplinary ladder that we follow, and I will absolutely have my employee brought up for review. Then I sent her to my desk with instructions to bring me the blue folder in my top left drawer. Then I explained to the customer that I would need approximately 40 hours to locate his original VIN, assuming the film hadn't been destroyed by the ravages of time, and assuming it was in the drawers I expected it to be in. I also guaranteed that he'd never have to work with that employee again. He signed off on an $800 authorization for time, and I told him I'd personally call him as soon as I reached the end of the 80 hours of search time or found his records. So he reluctantly left when I indicated that I needed to go find what was taking my employee so long to bring me my blue folder and discuss the discipline I'd promised. So I went to find my employee sitting in my chair with my blue folder. It was full of Dove chocolates and a note I wrote to myself on my first day there. Everything will be okay. That folder was for me. I had the worst boss. She hated my southern dialect even though I went to speech therapy to get rid of my southern drawl. I still used words she didn't like. On day 1, I wrote that note for myself. I stuck the chocolate in there because she was seriously like a dementor. She could suck the joy, life, and soul out of any group of people. I felt like chocolate helped clear the fog after she was gone. She was holding the folder and looking confused and scared. She knew she was about to get fired after that a-hole customer, but I reached over, grabbed a piece of chocolate, told her to help herself, and plopped down in my guest chair. She started to apologize, and I held my hand up again. I reiterated that we had just discussed my expectations that morning. She was to call me immediately if she had any inkling that someone was going to be upset with her, which she did. She didn't engage, just called me and waited, which was exactly what she was supposed to do. I told her I had to write her up for following directions completely and document that her performance had improved immediately after our discussion, that I recommended an early end to her performance improvement plan. So I sent a different employee to find the guy's records, which took about 25 hours. Then I called the guy to explain that we found his VIN, but that we were unable to find any other record of it after he bought it. We told him he could come down to pick up a copy of the record. The same employee he demanded to be fired was there when he came to pick up the record. She held one finger up to him to indicate that he should wait, closed her window, and called me. I personally walked down to deliver his record. He started yelling at me that I promised to fire the employee. I corrected him that I agreed to consider the disciplinary ladder and that he would never have to work with her again. Never did I promise to fire her. He left in a huff with his useless VIN from a vehicle that probably didn't even last 20 years before it got junked. And car junkies, it was some kind of MGA car which I had never heard of before. I'm not a boss anymore. I actually didn't enjoy trying to convince people that the only rules they needed to follow were to work when you're supposed to work and to be polite, professional, and courteous at all times. So I found a better job with no managerial duties. The next story is, you could have asked me for it instead of lie. The cast of this story will be my girlfriend Rachel, subleaser Cody, and my former best friends and roommates Ethan and John. Important to note, Ethan and John are a couple, and John is a leasing agent at our apartment complex. I moved into a 3x3 student housing apartment with Ethan and John in August 2018. It was really nice and cost a pretty penny, but I was making good money at the time. They were fantastic roommates, clean, considerate, open communication, and my best friends. Things were going fine, and the job I worked when I signed was medical debt collection. After 3 months of living there, 6 months at the job, I couldn't stand it anymore. I felt like a terrible person harassing people for thousands of dollars for emergency room visits. So eventually I quit and went back to being a substitute teacher. My soul felt better, but my savings would only last me so long. I began looking for a subleaser a little under 2 months prior to my planned move-out date. It was impossibly hard to find someone. I really wanted to find someone who would be a good fit, so they could avoid living with a bad roommate. Eventually, I meet Cody. Cody was a cute little twink boy and shared similar interests. He was perfect. Cody asked me to help him move some non-essential stuff in about 3 to 4 days prior to the 1st of December, because breaking his existing lease would give him only 24 to 48 hours to vacate, and not enough time to move. I agreed because I needed a body to sign my lease, and he had already taken a tour and spoke to the leasing office. I get off work and go straight to the apartment to hang out for an hour or so before helping out. I moved to the opposite side of town, and it was not worth driving home in rush hour. I noticed Ethan and John moved their bedroom items into my room. I thought highly of them and assumed they reached some sort of agreement to trade rooms, as I gave everyone each other's contact info. I go to Cody's place to grab some stuff and head back. By then, Rachel and John got there. Cody is visibly confused, as I had promised him my room, the largest and most private room. John told us that there was a mistake in the leasing software, electronic leases, and that our room assignments were mixed up. Therefore, the big bedroom belonged to him. I'm not that stupid. Cody went to make a phone call, while Rachel asked me to step outside for a cigarette. Rachel then explained how John told her the truth. The truth being, he told her the lie he had prepared about the room assignments. We go back inside and John tells me not to worry, because he can find someone to move in the next day, since Cody backed out. I can't blame him. The next day, John tells me he found someone to move in, but wants me to pay half the rent. I was not going to have to pay that money if my deal went successfully. I was feeling pretty defeated and ready to pay it and cut Ethan and John out of my life quietly. I told my mom what happened, and she said heck no, and to write an email to the manager. So I did, and the next day I got a nasty phone call and text from Ethan because John was getting questioned by his superiors. I didn't receive any correspondence, so I called the leasing office. The leasing manager told me it was simply he said, she said, and they can't do anything without a witness statement. So I called up Cody. Cody told me he'd call that instant for me. The day after that, I went to the property with all my keys and informed them I had vacated. They asked for my name, and what do you know, I was speaking to the property manager, John's boss's boss. She pulled me into her office and informed me that I was off the hook because there was no problem with the leasing software. John caught lying. She then said John would receive consequences. Cody was given a different apartment to live in, and Ethan and John would have to move everything back into their previous rooms immediately. It was instant relief. However, 2 weeks later, a close friend of mine spent Christmas at my family's house instead of their apartment like intended. John sent said friend some nasty texts, and as it turns out, John was fired. I would have loved to see his smug little face. He lost his $200 rent discount, lost his job, and now has 3 bad references on his work history, since things ended poorly at his last 2 jobs before that. I just wanted out of my lease. He could have asked me for the room instead of lie. The last story is, so if I finish all work in 4 hours, I should just sit at my desk? Okay. Backstory. I was the warehouse manager for a company that worked with human gut microbiomes. My duties included shipping, receiving orders, setting reorder points for everything the lab used, cleaning and restocking items, ordering, and a few other standard things. My boss was a new hire, and her office was in a state 1,000 miles away. That went on a 3-month vacation before starting, so I answered to the facility manager until she was to start. When I was brought on, the warehouse was a nightmare. The same items were being stocked in multiple locations throughout the warehouse for no logical reason. No first-in, first-out systems, and the inventory tracking software they used was a mess. Many items were discontinued or no longer even used. It took me about 2 to 3 weeks to lock down my area of operations, but once I got everything right, I noticed I didn't have much work to occupy those 8 long hours. Many days I'd be done with everything by 10 o'clock. My start time was between 6 and 6:30, so I started asking higher-ups at my facility if I could help out other sections. They said, sure, we'd love your help. I started assisting customer service by sending pre-formatted messages to help free up the service team. I also helped the team that processed samples. Well, I'm about a month and a half on the job, and my new boss, Pam, finally starts. As soon as Pam starts, she decides I'm doing too much work in other departments, and that I need to stay at my desk all day, unless I'm performing warehouse-related duties, or a manager from another section gets written permission from her to allow me to leave my desk. She disseminates this information to the entire facility management through an email. Now, an important note, YouTube and other video streaming services were allowed to be used during the workday, so long as you got your work done while watching. I think you know where this is going. It was allowed, but was not supposed to be the center of attention. In my case, it was very obviously the center of my attention. Quick note. Well, as you can tell from my post, I'm in the States. What you're just finding out is that I love rugby. Playing, watching, talking about it, just absolutely love it. Well, where I am, there's not a large rugby community, so I take any chance I can get to watch matches. Malicious compliance. After being told I was to no longer assist other departments, I brought up to Pam that I was bored out of my skull and wanted to help out where I could, to keep myself occupied and make the day go by. I was told, oh well, you were hired to work the warehouse, so work the warehouse. Okay, I'd get in between 6 and 6:30 and knock out my work. By 10, rugby was the only thing on my monitor, and I was kicked back in my chair loving my paid rugby break. This went on for weeks with higher-ups coming into my office and asking what I was doing. I would explain and some would shrug and walk away, while others would ask about the match or rugby as a whole. I love this even more because now not only was I getting paid to watch the sport I loved, but now I was getting paid to talk to people about the sport I love. I assumed with higher-ups seeing this, they would put an end to it, but nope, it just stayed that way. Even when Pam was told what I was doing, she said, good, he's where he needs to be. Well, after 2 to 3 months of this, YouTube ran out of new matches, so I quit and moved on to a better job. What was the fallout of my compliance? Company became further behind processing samples, while I got paid to watch rugby and get paid. Why did I leave? This is just not a career environment for me. I need to work with my hands and stay busy or I'm miserable. Some people work to make money. Others make money because they like to work. I found a better job, better paying and at least more engaging. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications.